Good morena koutou. Day 2 of PC 37 Nukuhau. And just a couple of matters before we get underway. We've received a number of bits of information over the last 18 hours. I just want to read those into the record. We have received an additional statement from Thomas Hendricks, submitter number 18, who sought leave today to present a couple of issues that he had neglected to cover off in his presentation yesterday. I indicated to him that I was happy to receive a written statement rather than an appearance, and he's filed a short statement related to SEPTED and stormwater management. So in line with the views that he gave yesterday, so I don't have any problem in accepting that. It's a simple statement. We've also received, and thank you, Mr. Maldani, the 8th of November memo from Ms. Sui and Liu, and that's very helpful. Thank you. And the last item was a summary statement from Linda Walter, the council's archaeologist, basically concluding that the information that she's now been provided with satisfies her on the matter, and still seeking an investigation of the depressions prior to development, and on that basis sought leave not to appear today, and I've granted that leave not to appear. Those issues are resolved between the two of them, so I think there's no need for her to appear and present that statement. I think that's all the papers I've got around me for additions for the moment. So, Mr. Maldani, if you've got anything else to tell us.
Sorry, no, sir. That's, I think, got the ground covered, so we're comfortable.
Thank you very much. And we've been advised that Satari Steenstra will be appearing as counsel for Rangatira E-Trust later on this morning, so I'm not sure if that information has been generally provided, but she will be preparing submissions. I haven't received any submissions from her, so I'm not sure whether she's just making oral submissions or what. All right, well, in that case, let's get underway today with the submitters. And Mr. Kusabs, I see you're there, so welcome to you. And Mr. Greaves also, I understand. So over to you.
Morning, Commissioners. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Yes, I'm David Greaves. I'm the planner that's been employed by the trusts to represent the case today. So I am joined by Mr. Kusabs today, who is an owner of some of the land and is representing the owners. Now, Mr. Kusabs provided a written statement that was circulated on Friday. I believe the Commissioners have that and have read that.
We have that and we have read that. So that's fine.
So I guess that it was because Mr. Kusabs is not an expert witness, it wasn't circulated prior. So a number of the submitters may not have seen it. So I just seek your direction on whether you want Mr. Kusabs to read through his statement or whether you would like to.
I think it's a very helpful summary of the background, and I think it would do no harm whatsoever for Mr. Kusabs to read that if he wishes to. I mean, over to you, Mr. Kusabs, whether you read it or whether you just want to point us to the relevant paragraphs in that. I leave that entirely over to you. As far as your evidence goes, Mr. Greaves, I'm assuming that you will just touch and run on bits and pieces of that.
That's right, yes.
Okay. So, Mr. Kusabs, I take it.
Okay, well, if you wish, I can read it, and I can emphasise things as I go through if you are happy with that.
Yep.
My name is Andrew Marutuehu Kusabs, and I'm the chairman of the Rangatira blocks 8A17A5, 8A17A6, and 8A1T2X, and 8A12T2Y. And in this statement,
Don't you wish they had more friendly names than those, don't you?
they are a bit tongue twisters, but I've got used to them over the last 30 years.
That's right. I mean, I'm happy as you go through just to refer to it as 5, 6, X and Y, and we'll understand what you're referring.
Yep. In this document, they've classed as the rangatira trusts or the owners, so that makes it easier. The owners made submissions, submit a 50, and again a further submission 60 to the proposed plan change. And I have the authority from my co-trustees and the owners to give this evidence on their behalf. It started off in 1983-84 when Rangatira 8870 was completed, a subdivision of land fronting Acacia Bay Road. It was a strip development down Acacia Bay Road. The subdivision involved 27 residential sections and a site for commercial use, which is now part of the Nukuhau shops. In 1984, Rangatira 8817 established a public reserve adjoining the Urupara at Nukuhau. In 1986, a further public reserve was established for public recreational use on Lakewood Drive. In 1986, 34 sections were created in Chase Grove and Manson Road, and six sections were created in Lakewood Drive. In 1993, 24 sections were created along Lakewood Drive by way of further subdivision. In 1998, 28 sections were created along Fetu Place, including an extension to the Urupara and Lakewood Drive. In 1999, a further 23 sections were released along Lakewood Drive. In 2000, a further 19 sections were subdivided along Lakewood Drive up to the present farm gate. All the above developments were approved by the Maori Land Court by way of status change of the affected land from Maori freehold to general land. Excuse me. The shops at Nukuhau were developed between 1994 and 2011. As the demand for the shops increased, further shops were added between the above dates. So we set off with 4 and then added another 3 later on. The current commercial site has capacity for between 4 to 6 further shops. In 1989, the Trust built 3 kaumātua units, 2-bedroom units for our elders. And those are directly across the road from the shopping centre. The history of the land owned by the trusts. In 1981, the Rangatira 8817 Trust were created, and the trustees were vested with ownership of 27 hectares of rural land in Taupō. Land had a government valuation of $46,000 at the time. Previous to the current owner's ownership, the land had not been well managed. It had been used as a dumping site. The dumping site for mill waste and the like. It had no historical value or significant cultural landmarks. The Rangatira 8817 Trust have endeavoured to revamp the land and property care for it. As a result of the efforts of the trustees by the 1990s, the asset base of the Rangatira 8817 Trust had an estimated value of 1.6 million, consisting of a commercial building, 3 kaumātua flats, developed sections for sale, and cash. In 1996, Maori Land Court approval was given to subdivide and sell some of the land, provided that the proceeds of the land were applied to the purchase of more land or the Rangatira 8817 trusts. The remaining undeveloped land was put into trees. In 2002, from the sale of proceeds mentioned above, Rangatira 8817A5 Trust obtained the beneficial ownership of an irrigated dairy farm in Mill Road, Riparoa, for $4 million. For the benefit of the owners of the Rangatira 8817A5 Trust. Based on recent sales in the area and other professional advice, the trustees estimated the Riparoa farm now has a value close to $6 million or probably more. Since the 1990s, the Rangatira 8817 trusts have been considering further subdivision options for the available land in Taupō based on the previous success. On the 21st of September 2013, there was a meeting of beneficial owners of the Rangatira 8817 Trust. The minutes of that meeting recorded that there was a long-standing mandate from the owners of the Rangatira 8817 Trust to subdivide and sell the land. It resolved at the meeting that the last trust be given the mandate to seek the approval of the Maori Land Court to carry out further development of the trust's land with the intention of selling it. Land development consultant David Trewavas had been involved in the development of the land and surrounding areas since 1984, had been engaged to provide preliminary plans in relation to a proposed stage subdivision of the land. The subdivision is likely to take the following form. The Rangatira 8A17A5 will be subdivided first. Initially, there will be 29 lots division. This stage is a practical first step because it involves fewer major earthworks than in other areas of the subdivision and relies on existing roading patterns established by the Taupō District Council. It is envisioned that the sale of these lots will go a long way to funding the remainder of the subdivision by all of the Rangatira 8, 8 and 17 trusts. The subdivision and sale of the Rangatira 8, 17A5 will also act as a test of viability for the balance of the subdivision. Rangatira 8, 17A5 will then subdivide the remainder of its land, followed by X and Y. Earthworks required by Rangatira X and Y to remove fill material will be utilised by 8A17A5 to infill gully areas within its boundaries. Rangatira 8A17A6 is currently a natural gully used informally by the public without any restriction. By itself, the land offers little commercial value and has no historical significance. It is envisioned that the Rangatira 8A17A6 block could be vested in the Taupō District Council as part of the Trust's obligation as a developer to provide reserve land to the council. This is the highest and best use of the Rangatira 8A17A6 land. Rangatira 8A17A6 Trust will then be compensated by the Rangatira 8A17A5 Trust for the vesting of the land in this manner. On the 7th of March 2017, the Maori Land Court made an order pursuant to Section 135 of the Te Turi Whenua Maori Act 1993 that the lands vested in the Rangatira 8A17 Trust shall cease to be Maori land and shall become general land. The order declaring the status of the said lands shall cease to be Maori land and shall become general land was registered against the relevant titles on the 1st of June 2018. Consultation by applicants. Hamish Grant Crawford, on behalf of the applicants, did consult with me and my co-trustee, Gloria McLaughlin, on at least 2 occasions regarding PC 37. On each occasion, we requested amendments to be made to the proposed zoning. Most of it, not all of our requests, were not incorporated into the plan. Cultural significance of trust lands. I'm aware that Noel Manahira Mansell acknowledged tohanga of whakapapa and history of this area and the Te Aroa generally, was an elder and a trustee of the Rangatira 8A17 Trusts up to 1984. I believe that Mr. Mansell would not have agreed to the development referred to in paragraph 2.1 and 2.2 if the land had cultural significance to Maoridom. At the same time, Mr. Mansell was involved with the Rangatira 8A17 Trust, other elders, including Otiti Wikirafi, Michael Pitty-Roy and Andrew Henry, were also trustees at various stages. These gentlemen are respected elders, or were respected elders, and I also believe that they would not have approved any development if the affected land had any cultural significance to Maoridom. Before the creation of the 28 sections along Whetu Place and Lakewood Drive, I consulted Mrs. Wynne McKenzie, who is also a knowledgeable person in the master of this area, and she confirmed that the affected lands had no cultural significance to Maoridom. I note that Ms. Cleary is proposing an amendment to the proposed plan change to require a cultural impact assessment be completed prior to any subdivision activity being undertaken. As I've indicated in the preceding paragraphs, with regards to the trust's lands, I do not believe that such a requirement is necessary. While a cultural impact assessment may be appropriate for the other lands within the plan change area, in my view, it is important that such an assessment is undertaken by people with a thorough and complete understanding of the history of the land. This should form a requirement of any assessment undertaken. The owners support the principles of the plan change subject to the amendments set out in paragraph 8. Conclusion of the evidence provided Mr. David David John Greaves, on behalf of the owners of Rangatira Trust, dated 29th of October 2021. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Kusebs. Just divert for a second. Mr. Din, could you turn your camera off, please, and only have the cameras on when you're appearing? Mr. Din, can you hear me?
Yes, you did.
Yep. Thank you. Dale, do you want to raise some questions with Mr. Kusebs now, or after Mr. Greaves has presented his evidence? Just turn your mic on.
How's that?
That's good.
Thank you, Mr. Kusebs. Your submission was really interesting in terms of the context and some of the history of the land. I really just wanted to check my own assumptions, really, around, am I correct in thinking that the rangatira, the collective of those trust lands that you're talking about, so they're no longer Māori land, they're general land, correct?
General title, yes. All 4 blocks.
Yep. And so does that mean then that you're no longer, I guess, reporting to the Māori Land Court as such? Do you have any relationship with the court or no?
They have removed our register from the Maori Affairs registers. That's the share registers. So they don't do that any longer. We have to do our own. It's like an incorporation now.
Okay.
And we do report for courtesy only, really. I have our accounts, send them the accounts, just so that they're lodged with the court.
Okay, I guess I was just asking in terms of some of the other comments made around.
It's unusual.
Yes, yes. But
it was done, you know, when the Maryland, after Whina Cooper's marches and so on, they kind of put the clappers on what you could do with Maryland, and that one was one of them. But we were able to do these things mainly because we were reinvesting the money, unlike other trusts who just divided the money into shareholders as a dividend.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you don't have a trust order and hold AGMs and things, or do you?
We do follow that procedure.
Yeah.
Where our first meeting comes up this year, if the COVID will allow us, and we will report just as if we were a Maori trust.
Okay. Okay, but it's not you're free to subdivide and things. It's not subject to those same constraints of say some of the other Māori land blocks are in the area.
No.
Okay, and I think you were quite clear about saying that you don't think a CIA is required on your lands, but you are open to other lands outside of that within the plan change, or
I think so.
Can you expand on that a bit? Okay,
well, if I go a bit of history, you might understand how we as owners feel. My great-grandfather was a fellow called Ihaka. He was one of the persons who, with other chiefs in this area, who sold land to the Crown for the establishment of the Taupo village, or township as it was then.
Mm-hmm.
He fought in the battles of Taupo-Kaingaroa at Matata and Makatu. He also fought with the Arrow Flying Column at against the Court. So you can see he was favourite of the Crown. He was not a kupapa. He passed on his knowledge, and he was an old man, and he died in 1902. They say he was over 100. And that was passed on to his grandchildren, his sons and his grandchildren. My father, Roger, who was also involved in many of the lands around this area. My dad was one of the opposition to the sale of Maori land, the Rangatira blocks, in the 1977 Royal Commission. He was the one that took on the Taupo Borough and County Councils at the time, who wanted to sell off our lands to pay rates. He won that one. And they had 5 trusts and corporations created out of that commission. I had a sister who was involved with a punch up with Downers from her own money. She opposed the construction of floating things for boats on land adjoining our property.
Mhm.
She won that one. I was involved myself in creating Maori reservations around Lake Taupō on the block called Hiruharama-Pōnui and on Painotuako. These are lands that I have an interest in. I'm not worried about other people. I look after my lands. Against the wishes of the council at the time, Mr. Peter Crawford was the planner. And those things are now in place. So within our family, and I should say, Wyn Mackenzie was my sister. I didn't, in my evidence here, I call her Wyn Mackenzie, but she was actually Wyn Cusebs. So within my own family, we have people who are aware, in addition to all these other people on 5.1, of the history of these lands. And I'm saying, for our lands, I'm not talking about everybody else's, I'm only talking this, and I'm talking just our lands. I'm not an iwi rep, I'm not a hapu rep. I'm just talking about lands.
Yep.
We have enough knowledge within our group, within our families, to say, we know what's here. Why are you coming in to tell us what our lands are about?
Okay, I understand.
Yep.
Kapai. And so I guess just I wanted to just make crystal clear that I was reading it right in terms of your evidence. You talk a little bit there about consultation by the applicants.
Yes.
At 4.1. So, and then you say most, if not all, of our requests were not incorporated into the application. Is that right? Yes.
Well, I think they brought in a couple of things, but the shopping one was one. What was the other one? I can't remember what the other one was now, but the shopping one was one definitely we were against.
Okay, so you said,
Not because there's competition, but we just didn't think it was the right thing to do up there.
Yep. And you say there's some spare capacity amongst that centre at the moment, is that?
Yeah, well, I'll give a bit more history. Those shops were we put up 4 along the Acacia Bay Road. The first 4 shops, there's 3 on the fronting onto Acacia Bay Road and 1 behind it. It was many years later when we thought that there was a call for further shopping that we decided to put the next 3 in. We did that and then we couldn't let them. Nobody wanted them. Then finally we got a greengrocer who went broke after we provided him with chillers and goodness knows what else. He went bust. We had somebody there who had a kind of a specialty meat business. They didn't last long. And now the centre is really one of, we've got a hairdresser, a liquor shop, a dairy, and the balance of them are food takeaway businesses. Even now, right now, we've had to give them a rebate on their rentals because of COVID, of course, but we are always, they're all up to date with their rent, but it is one of those things that it's really a lot of work to keep them there.
Okay.
And to add more to the area would just make it, but none of us would be viable.
Okay, and so you said those tenants are quite stable, or they actually shift around quite a lot?
The first 4 shops have been very stable. The liquor store, well, they're always going to have business. The dairy is always going to have a bit of business. The hairdresser has had her moments, but we have kept on with her. We've carried it through. And the fish and chip shop, which was, I think most people from Taupō used to go over there to get their fish and chips. We became one of the fellow who did it rather than where the area was. We have now got, I think, a Thai, an Indian, and another Chinese, or one of those kind of food shops there. And they have been helped by us by encouraging market days and things like that. And so they're becoming better known, but it is hard work. And,
okay. So it sounds like then that as a collective of trusts, you're working together as one, and that's how you're going to work out your own internal plans, but also include this quite important part, which is the vesting of that lot. Forgive me for I won't even try to get the numbers right, but the one that sits in the gully. So those are all internal arrangements amongst the Rangatira Trust. So, but am I right in thinking then that even though you're not applicants, you are collaborating owners supportive of this application?
And we have from day one, basically. Like we have our meetings, it's called of all the 4 trusts.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Greaves, why don't we take your evidence now? And Mr. Cusebs, do you want to stay on the line? Because we may well bounce some questions afterwards.
Okay, well, I'll just turn off my sound.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you, sir. As per your direction, I won't go through my evidence in any particular detail, but there's a few matters that I thought were good to emphasise. The first is that the trust made submissions and further submissions in support of the plan change. There is logic to the location, and the trust have been supportive of that throughout. There's just 4 key points that was raised in the submissions that I want to talk about today. The appropriateness of the land and the staging of the development, the density of development, and in particular the application of that medium density overlay, the identification of the stormwater reserve along the southeastern boundary, and the potential effects on the community shopping centre. So the first was the appropriateness of the zoning. As I mentioned, the trust is supportive of the plan change as a whole. The TD 2050 growth management process that's been undertaken 15 or 16 or so years ago now has identified that this area is appropriate for urban development, given its location to the infrastructure and the existing urban form. And the trust, again, has had some long aspirations for development, to continue their development along there. I know that...
Can I just be clear, Mr. Greaves, in saying that, you're only referring to this particular parcel of land, i.e. the client who's engaged you, or are you exercising your professional opinion more broadly than that?
That comment was just in regards to the wider plan change area. In my view, it does make logical sense. It all abuts the existing residential environment. There's obviously a few bits and pieces that I've mentioned in my evidence, the likes of reverse sensitivity, and there's been a fair bit of discussion about capacity of infrastructure to deal with. But as a whole, in my view, the location is appropriate for the next stage of urban development.
Thank you.
And I also note that the applicant hasn't proposed any particular staging, and there's a bit of a discussion yesterday around that no one piece of land is reliant on another piece of land to be developed. And I think that's certainly the Trust's views as they've looked at developments along the way over the last number of years. They've got a number of frontages to roads and to infrastructure, and so they've got a number of options that they've identified. With regard to the density of development, so this is regarding the medium density zoning or overlay that's being proposed. I note in the planning evidence for the applicant that there doesn't appear to be any particular characteristics of the areas that have been identified as being appropriate for medium density zoning that are any different to the trust land. So in the further submission, the trust identified that they would support medium density zoning on their land. Has the same characteristics. In fact, it has a further separation from the major arterial roads and in particular Contact Energy's geothermal operations. So there's a less of an opportunity for reverse sensitivity effects to result. And in my view, there's no reason why the trust land is any different to any other land that's identified as medium density zoning, and therefore no reason why that zoning couldn't sit on the trust land either.
I did raise a query yesterday as to whether you had scope to actually require that, in that it wasn't in your primary submission. I acknowledge it's in your further submission. Do you want to just talk to that point?
Yes, I did look at that when I was engaged as well. And so certainly it's not a point of the primary submission, but it was specifically mentioned in the further submission. So it was a support of Rangatira E made a submission point about the location of higher density development being closer to the Lakewood Drive area. And as part of the further submission, the Trust included a plan, which I've attached to the end of my evidence, which identified the location of that zoning in the further submission itself. So in my view, it certainly wasn't a primary submission point, but it was a matter that was raised in the further submission. So I
guess the question is whether there are any parties who would not have expected that to come through, who might otherwise have made a submission on it. That's the fine point, I guess, on that.
Yes, yep, that is a good point. I guess it's something for the commissioners to come to a conclusion on.
All right, thank you.
With regards to the stormwater reserve, so this is the strip of land directly adjacent to the southeastern boundary of the trust land. So in the proposed plan change, it was identified as a stormwater reserve of approximately 10 metres in width. In the further submissions, the trust identified that that may not actually be appropriate. It doesn't necessarily have the characteristics of a full stormwater gully as some of the larger gullies in the plan change area. And I've included some photos in the end of my evidence to demonstrate, although it was a particularly bad day, unfortunately, when those photos were taken, but show that there is some depressions here and there, but it's not a well-worn gully path like it is on the major gullies further along in the development. So in my view, rather than identifying a stormwater reserve in the structure plan itself, that seems to be more appropriate to deal to that through the subdivision process. So the way that the rules are currently proposed, it's a discretionary activity to subdivide the land, and part of the assessment is to manage the infrastructure, including the stormwater. So in my mind, it would be appropriate to look at how big or small or what stormwater reserves are necessary depending on the scale of the subdivision itself at that point in time.
You heard Mr. Bird yesterday answer questions on that particular matter. Any particular comments you had on his responses?
I didn't hear all of Mr. Bird, unfortunately. I only heard a part of it.
And I guess the other point is, at the moment, as I understand it, well, as it's shown on the structure plan, it is indicative, so it's not actually stapled in as a fact. And I think Mr. Bird was basically saying, well, we need to, it needs to be something at the bottom of the extended catchment to actually divert stuff into A6, into the reserve.
Yeah.
And whatever that might be a matter that obviously a future stormwater management plan comes in play and determines. Yes. I guess we'll hear back from council later on today as to whether they've made any changes in their views on that. So thank you.
Yeah. The final point that I was going to bring up was the community shopping centre. So Mr. Q-Sabs has provided a bit of background to that, and I think the key point in my mind is that the plan change is reasonably silent on what the effects of or the appropriateness even of the shopping centre. Holistically, having local shops to serve the local community makes sense, but there doesn't appear to be any evidence to suggest that the size and scale that is being proposed or the location that's being proposed is appropriate. I know that there is some economic evidence to suggest that there's not any adverse effects on the town centre itself, but it hasn't gone any wider than that, from what I understand, to justify that size, scale and location. So I've come to the conclusion that, in my view, it's probably more appropriate to go through a individual resource consent in the future to identify a location, a size, and have that supported by a comprehensive assessment of effects, rather than to identify a block of 2,500 square metres of land without that evidence in front of you. That was the only points that I had wanted to make. So happy to take any questions you might have.
No, thank you, Mr. Graves. It's a helpful summary too. Kevin, any questions of either Mr. Q-Sabs or Mr. Greaves?
No, questions I had were covered by Dale earlier, so I thank Mr. Q-Sabs for that history. That was, for me, very helpful.
Okay. Dale, any questions for Mr. Greaves? All right, well, looks like the two of you got off scot-light. Well, not quite scot-free, but relatively light. But thank you very much for the background and the clarification. Certainly it was an issue that was pursued yesterday with respect to the stages of the land. So that was helpfully clarified. And yes, we'll see what we do with the recommendation, Mr. Greaves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good. Right, next on my list is Tani Lawless. I don't know if Tani is, I don't see the name. Do we have anyone representing Tani Lawless? If not, what about Jeff Ramaka? Is Mr. Ramaka there?
Please. Yes. Yes, Chief Ramaka is here.
Excellent. If you'd like to turn your camera on now, and we'll take your submission, Mr. Ramaka.
Yeah, we're just getting that
That's
all sorted.
That's all right. Yeah.
Oh, there I am.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Now, what would you like to tell us, Mr. Ramaka?
I guess I should probably, to get things right, I'll do my read through my submission, and that way I won't miss anything. Is that a better idea?
I'm just pulling up your submission at the moment. I've got it in front of me. Yes, if that's what you would prefer to do. I mean, it's. I'm just having a look at it. It's. Why don't you just touch on the main points of your submission, since we have it in front of us? So yeah.
Okay, I submitted this in regards to my whānau and my hapu, Ngāti Rauhoto and Ngāti Te Urunga, but also with our other hapu, Ngāti Te Rangi-ita, Ngāti Rui-Ngarangi in mind as well. As a general rule, we oppose, mainly on the grounds that consultation in this area is pretty poor. And I know that some consultation did happen, but when you're dealing with Māori land, you need to talk to the Māori people, and not always the trusts, because to be honest with everybody here in this hearing today, we're at odds with our trusts. We're not happy with how things are going with our trusts. And I was quite disturbed to hear the statement made prior that all of our 4 rangatira blocks are basically in general title now, which basically alienates those lands from us. So what's the point of having a list of owners? Are we gone? Are we disappearing like the Moa? So I'm really disturbed to hear that statement today, and I'd like to attack that one again later. My submission was based on the grounds that how can you have a new subdivision of that size? Maybe in a larger city, that's a reasonable size subdivision, but here in Taupō, that's pretty big, and covers a lot of ground. There's no infrastructure talk prior to that development. So right now we're going through a lot of issues with one bridge, access to and from Nukuhau, Acacia Bay, Orua Nui, those districts to get back to town. A couple of years ago, we had a lot of congestion on our roads, and it did seem to ease off, but those peaks are starting to be felt again. And I'm really looking forward to, well, actually, I'm not looking forward to, but seeing how this thing works over the Christmas period. Also, Taupō is a bit of a hub for events. We get a lot of people coming for Ironman, Lake Taupō Cycle Challenge, big events like that, concerts. How are we really going to deal with one bridge if we go ahead with a large subdivision of that type? We really can't. We need to deal with the infrastructure first. And I'll use Tauranga, or should I say Mount Maunganui, as an example. I lived over there for a number of years, and it always seemed, for the time I was living there, we were fixing Maunganui Road. We were fixing Hewlett's Road. We were always fixing the road between the Mount and Mangatapu. Funnily enough, 20 years later, and they're still fixing it. Is that a situation that we're going to get into here? When we think about the nature of the Taupō District, I think we've got to have a look at a larger example of Taupō, and it's probably Hamilton. We have the Waikato River running past the town, and we've got communities on both sides of our river. We're not going to do it with one bridge. And so we need to understand that we're probably going to be looking at probably 3 or 4 bridges, or we identify and relocate, identify areas within our town, our takiwā, where our town can grow to. I don't think our side, the Nukuhau side, can take a bit, but not of that nature. I just don't think so. I also take council to task. Roughly 10 years ago, we had a discussion in regards to developing an area that we know as the Puo, which is down at the entranceway of the Waikato River. That has long been a place where our people have been to go down swimming, picnicking, and that area was identified to be improved and developed. Where has that gone? What has happened to that? So I want that revisited. I am not a person who would like to see a whole lot of a flash neighborhood built in our midst, and half of those houses are empty whilst the owners are living in Auckland or somewhere else. I've always been a person who believes you build a house, you live in it, put your family in it, don't leave it empty. Otherwise, you're not really part of our community. And we want people who want to be part of our community. Taupō has a strong spirit, and we have to retain that spirit. There are already issues along the Acacia Bay Road, Painoa area, where after considerable rainfall, there's a lot of water that runs down off the Rangatira E block, more so than any other, and down into Painoa Te Ako. What provisions are being made to take care of our whānau down there, because they get a good washing, so to speak, when those rains come. And it's not their doing. It begins at the top. It should be diverted from the top and not by our whānau down below. Has there been any thought in regards to affordable housing? Once again, I take our trusts to task. If they are having anything to do with this, what about our people? Where are we in this picture? Are we going to lose more land for somebody else? How do we benefit? We've got I heard Mr. Kusabs talk about our shopping centre. How have I benefited from that shopping centre? How has my mother benefited from that shopping centre? How have Ngāti Rauhoto, Ngāti Te Urunga, Ngāti Rui Ngārangi benefited from that shopping centre? We haven't. What, go buy a beer and get an ice cream? As I mentioned with the Puo down below, sorry, I'm jumping around here a little bit. I'm trying to weave my way through the submission. The parking area, sorry, the swimming area down below at the Puo by the Waikato River, there was a plan, and I do have that plan here somewhere. It was a park-like setting. It had good car parking area. It even had a waka shed. It had a bombing platform. It was an aquatic wonderland, so to speak, in a wonderful area, a place to go. I want that revisited, and I want to know why that's been taken away from us or hidden away from us. I know that
I don't want to stop you, Mr. Ramaka, but that really isn't part and parcel of our our issue here.
So the main issue that I take to task is the one about infrastructure. We can do whatever we like, really, but we need the bones for that to happen. We need the infrastructure for it to happen, for it to be successful. I'm just quickly racing over my work here. So once again, I'll finish off here just asking, how do the rest of our landowners benefit? What's in this where we are concerned? We've been here nearly 1,000 years. We probably will be for the next. How are we considered in all of this? That's my question. And with that, I'll just call it a day. Kia ora mai, everybody.
I appreciate that, Mr. Ramaka. And yeah, fair questions. Kevin, do you have any responses or questions for Mr. Ramaka?
No, no questions. I've read through his submission, and I thank you for your passion, Mr. Ramaka. I hear you.
Thank you.
Dale? All right, well, thank you for your submission. I mean, the requesters obviously have heard your submission, Mr. Ramaka, and we'll hear from them a bit later on as to whether they have any responses to your questions.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Yep. Okay. Tony Lawler is still not in the room, so to speak. No. What about Garrick Workman? Is Mr. Workman, are you there? No. Well, I don't know whether Mr. Farquhar and Turangi-Tongariro team are here either. I'm not sure. Certainly not listed. All right. Well, Carrie, can I just ask you to, do you have a contact for either Tony Lawless or Garrick Workman?
Hi, Chair. Can you hear me?
Oh, I've just got a message come up.
Yes.
With respect to Mr. Law's advice, he's stuck out on the side of the road. Well, let's hope that's not a congestion issue. Right. Do we have a contact for Mr. Workman?
Can you hear me, David?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. I will ring around and just see if I can bring them on sooner.
All right. Let's take a 15-minute break then, and
Okay.
we'll just come back at well, let's say on the hour. Come back at 10 o'clock and see if we've got any submitters. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. I think we're back together again. I see Mr. Lawless, you're with us now, so that's great. If you'd like to turn your camera on and your audio, and we'll hear your submission. Mr. Lawless, can you hear me?
David,
Yeah.
if I may jump in, Tani said that this is the first time he's using Zoom, so he's just getting to grips with it. Additionally, I've just spoken to our submitter, Garrick. He is having technical difficulties. He's not familiar with Zoom at all.
Right.
So he won't be able to speak.
Does he want to come in on a phone line?
I've offered other alternatives, and I did offer that he could send me an email just with some additional words.
Right. Okay.
And so he's going to take that approach.
Thank you. Thank you. And is there any way we can help Mr. Lawless connect? Or?
I've just sent him another text to say that we are ready for him. So yeah, we'll just maybe give him a few seconds unless you want to move on and call him when you are ready.
Yeah, no, I think we had a note just through that the Rangati'i Trust team can't appear before 11, so it's just Mr. Lawless now.
Okay.
Mr. Lawless. Can you hear me, Mr. Lawless? Just nod if you can. I don't think your audio is on at the moment. No. Just need the volume up or something. All right. Well, whilst we're waiting for that connection to be made, Mr. Bonus, do you want to come online?
Good morning, panel.
Yeah, hi there. You've just sent through a pile of summary statements, I notice. I've had just a very, very quick look through those. Just, are you intending that that all of those witnesses read those summary statements, or simply go to their conclusions, which would be my preference?
Sir, I wasn't even thinking of putting you through that with your permission. There was a number of the witnesses listened yesterday, and also because of the logical order of things, in my view, needed to provide some acknowledgement that they reviewed the evidence.
Yeah.
So effectively, all those summaries do, in the majority of cases, is simply acknowledge the information that they've seen, and that there's no real change in terms of what their views and recommendations are to me and also you. So, sir, if it helps, where I was suggesting in terms of a batting lineup, and we're pretty much down to, I guess, the seventh and eighth in the batting order. Given the discussion,
that's usually where we get to fairly quickly.
if it's gone well, indeed. There was a bit of discussion yesterday around management plans. So I've asked Mr. Meadowcroft in terms of stormwater, and Mr. Farquhar. So they've provided summaries, which they're happy to take you through at shorter notice if necessary. Yeah. There was also a bit of discussion yesterday from Mr. Heath and also council for the proponents around this 140 over the next 10 years of additional development. I asked Mr. Smith to go away.
Yeah, I had a quick look at Mr. Smith's statement. It's very helpful. So yes, we certainly want him to go through that.
I thought it would be too. So I've asked effectively Mr. Smith, Mr. Farquhar, Mr. Meadowcroft to present, along with myself to sort of run as sweeper at the end.
Yeah.
I'm hoping, sir, and panel, with your permission, that the rest of the council's witnesses can be excused.
No, I'm sure that's the case. As I say, I had a quick read all of them in that 15 minutes. They don't take much to read. So, and yes, unless people really want to appear to say I agree, happy to let them go.
I think that would be a waste of panel's time.
We'll confirm that a little bit later on when I've had a conversation with co-commissioners, because they won't have seen those yet.
True. I think yes, let us come through.
I think we've got Mr. Lawless on the line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry
Welcome,
about
Mr. Lawless. No, that's fine, and thanks for persevering and coming through. You're coming through loud and clear in terms of voice, anyway. So, what would you like to tell us?
First of all, hello to everyone. My name's Tani, and I'm a shareholder in Rangatira 8A17A. I truly have been trying to participate because I've had no knowledge of what's going on, and no one regarding land management nor the plan change have been able to give me a confirmation on what is actually happening. And I just wanted to get on board to ensure things are going right. And as a landowner, I want to know what's going on. And yeah.
Well, then that is basically what your submission was. So thank you for that. Dale, do you want to just follow that one down a little bit? You'll hear from one of the other commissioners in a minute, Tani.
All right, thanks.
Kia ora, Tani. We've got you there on phone. I've read your submission, and just to be clear, because we've got a few different blocks, rangatira blocks. So you're saying that you're part of the 8A17. You're one of those owners, is that right?
All right. Yes.
Okay. And so were you able to listen into the evidence earlier this morning?
No, I wasn't. No, I've been stuck on the road out Napier Taupō. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So we had Mr. Q-Sebs, who understands the chair for those trusts, and we heard from him. It's quite clear to me where you're coming from. I'm not sure how far that is for us to determine. It does sound like it's more of a question amongst your owners and your trustees, I think. So I don't actually have any questions as such, Chair.
I mean, the short story, Mr. Lawless, that we were told this morning is that the land that is part and parcel of this plan change has already been registered as general land and removed from the Murray Land Court jurisdiction. And it sounds to me like, as Commissioner Hunier said, there are issues which you need to take up outside of these particular proceedings, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think that is correct, and I've found it really hard finding information out from authorities, and as a landowner, I wasn't aware that it did get changed to triennial title, and I've only found that out lately. So yeah, I mightn't have much to say here, but I was just mainly here to try and find out what was going on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thanks for making the effort. We appreciate that. But yes, as I say, there's not much I think we can do to help you in terms of the issues that that are of concern to you. So, thank you for your submission.
Well, can you explain what the Nukuhau plan change is?
Well, that might take a little bit of a while. I think you probably need to grab some of the plans and documents and sit down with. Well, I don't know what your relationship with Mr. Kusabs is, but it seemed to me that he would be an obvious person to sit down with and talk those issues through.
I think too, Chair, everything that we have in front of us, Mr. Lawless, is available online as well. So, including the further information that's come through this morning from Mr. Kusab. So it's quite a lot of info to get through, but it is online or will be online, if that helps.
Yeah, I was just mainly wanting to get involved because I don't want anything, I don't know if dodgy is the word, happening to the land that we're owners of.
Right, well, understand that, but I guess we're tasked with deciding whether or not the plan change should proceed, and if it proceeds, the content of that plan change, and it'll be a while before we reach that decision, I think. So you are a submitter. You've got full rights of submission and appeal. So I guess wait and see what our decision is, and then decide the next best course for your concerns.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Tanya, and thank you for making the effort to get through to us today. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right.
Yep. See ya.
Right. Bye-bye. Mr. Bonus, do you want to come back online?
Hello, sir, panel.
I think
it would be helpful if I called a couple of witnesses now to take us through to say 11 o'clock with Mr. Smith to appear afterwards.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think if you hold back the ones who we really do want to talk more to until we've heard from the Rangatira E-Trust, that would be good. But yes, if you want to stand up a couple of people in advance of 11 o'clock, fine.
That'll be an efficient use of your time. So I understand Mr. Meadowcroft is there. He's got a very small summary which he circulated this morning, just dealing in terms of matters around stormwater management and this question around stormwater management catchment plan.
Let me just check that my fellow commissioners have actually got that material first of all, because they may not yet have downloaded or uploaded that, or I'm not sure if it was put on Diligent or not. Carrie, was that put up on Diligent, or is that just circulated to us through email?
It's been circulated through email. I'm actually just putting it on Diligent right now. Yeah.
Now
Chair, if you can point me there, because I'm looking at the emails that have just come through this morning and I can't find it. So have you had that time email sent? maybe some reference?
There were a number of them sent through summary statements. They're all headed summary statements, and they came through between 9 and 9:30, effectively.
So I've got Cordell.
Yes, there are two individual ones, and then there's a fuller set which came through at 9:01, which. And just to note,
can I just also add, Commissioner, I'm in a similar place to
okay.
Commissioner Herney.
Okay.
I've got 3 emails from Ms.
Yes.
Robinson, but I don't have Mr. Meadowcroft's.
No, nor do I, and I was about to make
Yeah.
that point too, Ms. Modani. Thanks for that. So do we have a copy sent through from Mr. Meadowcroft? Maybe we should take a 15-minute break to sort make sure we've got all the material we need in front of us, and then resume it at past, shall we? So no, I think we are only missing Mr. Meadowcroft at the moment, but if that could be sent through.
I'll confirm that now, sir.
Let's resume at past, shall we? Okay, thank you. Right, I think we've all received the Mr. Meadowcroft's statement. So, Mr. Bonus, do you want to do the introductions, or are you quite happy for Mr. Meadowcroft to do his own?
I feel like I'm stepping into legal counsel territory, but I'll do my best, sir.
Yes.
Mr. Meadowcroft, if you could just take the panel briefly through your summary of statement and be available to answer any questions at the end. Thank you, sir.
Good morning, everyone. So I'll start with comments on Mr. Bird's evidence. At paragraph 39, Mr. Bird notes that excess flows above the 10% AEP, which is the 10-year rainfall, will flow away via overland flow paths to gullies. Whilst this may be acceptable with WRC approvals, it is noted that it will be very important for gullies to then have approved management devices to slow and attenuate flows up to a 1% AEP, which is the 100-year rainfall, to avoid increasing peak flow rates downstream that would otherwise increase flood risk and cause erosion issues. At paragraph 46, Mr. Bird confirms this and that gullies may be used to manage flows in excess of a 10% or 10-year rainfall event, which I support, as it is not considered practical to manage the large volumes of stormwater within the residential areas. And the stormwater flows are, after all, what formed these gullies originally. Comments on submitter 43, Waikato Regional Council. Waikato Regional Council's requirement is to follow their comprehensive stormwater management guidance. I support a comprehensive approach to stormwater management following the WRC guidelines as outlined in the applicant's documents. Comments on submitter 52, Todd Land Development Consultancy. They submitted that an overall catchment plan that considers the whole catchment and water flows throughout, particularly looking at potential land use changes and the impact on the primary downstream channel, should be undertaken. I believe that a catchment management plan, or CMP, for the full plan change area is very important to ensure no adverse effects are created through the proposed activities, especially if the development occurs in an ad hoc or staged way. Other comments. Taupō District Council currently manages stormwater services as part of the roading network or via gullies and overland flow paths in the urban areas of the Taupō District. The existing Nukuhau residential stormwater falls under comprehensive discharge consent, which covers all of urban Taupō, which is resource consent 105048. New greenfield areas specifically require a catchment-wide CMP to allow the new stormwater infrastructure to be incorporated into the existing comprehensive stormwater consent. This should be provided for the full Nukuhau plan change area prior to any development. So in conclusion, my evidence remains unchanged, but I must reiterate that Taupō District Council have specifically noted their requirement for a catchment management plan for greenfield developments to provide the stormwater infrastructure to be inherited by them under the existing comprehensive stormwater consent for the area. This would be best provided globally as part of the plan change rather than on an ad hoc basis with subdivision consents, as this would not get the best catchment-wide solutions. I support the stormwater aspects of the proposed plan change based on the comments above, and with the appropriate stormwater mitigation proposed to attenuate and slow flows in the main gully to pre-development levels for up to 1% AEP or 100-year rainfall event, which is also a condition of the comprehensive stormwater consent. I support the opportunity to reduce flow velocity by planting gullies and with the use of appropriate detention within the gully systems, which should reduce flood and erosion issues in the lower catchment. There are good and bad examples of stormwater management and shared use connectivity opportunities evident in the adjacent Brentwood subdivision, with bunds, planting, and also an example where gully diversion has failed and has become contentious with downstream landowners. I believe that a catchment-wide CMP is important prior to development occurring to ensure no adverse effects are created through the proposed activities. especially if the development occurs in an ad hoc or staged way. That's my evidence. Thank you.
Right, thank you for that. Just a little bit more information about the existing comprehensive discharge consent. First of all, when does that expire? The existing consent expire?
I don't have that to hand, but I understand often the 30-year consent.
Yeah, typically that is the case. So that was gained in the last, say, within the last decade, say.
So yeah.
And is it part of that consent that requires catchment-wide CMP to be done under that, or is that a different policy?
No, it's under that consent.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Typically, that's what's required, right? All right. So that is a formal requirement of the consent. Just in terms of, and I guess the question is how that is done. Do you see that as being a necessity as part and parcel of this plan change, or simply sufficient for the plan change to, by some rule or cross connection, to require that between the approval of the plan change, if that's what happens, and any activity taking place on the land, any construction activity taking place or subdivision? So in terms of timing, what's your recommendation to us in terms of how that should proceed? I mean, there are a couple of options if we agree that that is something that should happen. I guess we have two options. One option is that we could require that as before we make our decision, so that we actually determine that. That has all sorts of implications, some of which are quite practical. For example, no one has any idea where the roads and so on are going to go anyway. So there's some real issues if you choose to go down that route. But then if it's left to the first subdivision that takes place, I guess that creates some issues for whoever does the subdivision, obviously, as well. So practically, what's your sense on timing and staging of that?
I don't believe that it needs to be done before you make your decision, because I think obviously, although equally I don't believe either that maybe it should be done at resource consent time, because I mean, I think it was touched on yesterday about the timing of developments, and we need catchment-wide solutions to manage stormwater. So that would require agreement between the various landowners. So it's my place to say exactly how it happens, but I believe it's it does need to happen and have all the landowner agreements for easements and that sort of thing. So we have been discussing that with the requirement early on with WSP, and I believe that they're open to doing it. I don't believe that you need to delay your decision on the plan change, because it can be made to work. It just is important to get all the landowners on board with how it would work and the easements required.
Okay. All right. Well, Mr. Bonus can tell us how he thinks that might work later on. Dale, Kevin, any questions for Mr. Meadowcroft?
Yes, please. I'm interested then, when we think about the movement of water and the contour and the way it works out there, does that mean that in the currently developed part south of the plan change, so that area between Acacia Bay Road and the plan change, we walked, Councillor Taylor and I walked through that gully that's currently part of the Rangatira 8A17 blocks proposed to be vested. So when you get to that, the boundary between that and then the area to that, is that covered by a catchment plan at the moment, presumably as part of the previous subdivision?
I don't believe there's any catchment management plan for Nukuhau at all at the moment. So it does not need a catchment-wide approach, taking into account all of the proposed development area.
So I guess it's a question of scope for me then. When you say catchment management plan, do you mean beyond the plan change area?
Well,
including beyond that all the way to the lake, presumably, or?
To consider the effects of the development right down to the lake and ensure that no increased flood risk or erosion issues will happen all the way to the lake. Yes, the full catchment where water lands on the ground and runs either through from the upstream part right through to the lake.
So for example, you know, when we went on our site visit, there doesn't seem to be any culvert, correct me if I'm wrong, to under Acacia Bay Road. So as part of, I guess, if it was a catchment management plan approach, would some of those implications be works beyond the boundaries of the plan change, presumably in what is at the moment council stormwater reserves?
You're correct. Council is aware of having no culvert there, and they do have plans to put it in. And they're having challenges with the landowner in terms of land ownership, which is maybe a prime example of why you need to have the CMP in place, and ownership of the gullies to council is important. So now my understanding is they're having to wait for that subdivision to happen before they can acquire the land to put the culvert in. And I acknowledge that that culvert isn't necessarily this developer's issue, because they can hold back, they would be required to hold back and attenuate flows upstream. So exacerbating this problem, but it is a good example of why a CMP is required, and considering the flows all the way to the lake.
So would those costs be borne by the developers or potentially a mix?
Well, the CMP itself would be the developer's cost, but that culvert, I believe, is already on council's plans to put in, whether or not they have funding right now because of the challenges they're having with land ownership. But I don't believe that culvert is necessarily for this developer to cover, because they shouldn't be putting any more flow down it anyway.
So do catchment management plans generally cover land that's beyond council's management?
I guess the intention is to cover the full catchment, so right from where the water falls on the land right down to where the receiving watercourse is, and ensure that there's no adverse effects on land outside of where they're developing.
Thank you, Chair.
Kevin, got any questions?
Yeah, my question was around that, and your comment around the plan being globally applied. So you've pretty much answered my question. When we talk about catchment, it would be where the water naturally flows, having hit the ground. And I just wonder, you talked about the downstream effects. I'm sort of looking at the structure plan map here, the upstream effects, and the elevations above where the private plan change request area is. What effect would a catchment management plan have upon what does affect a greenfields area upstream? So it's the layman's question.
Sure. Well, I guess the main intention is for them to ensure that the development has no adverse effects. So it would sort of look at modelling scenarios of the existing situation and then the fully developed situation, and demonstrate how they're going to manage stormwater to pre-development levels. Does that answer your question? Or?
Not sure. I mean, they've got control over what's within the plan change area, but limited or no control over what's upstream. In that respect, so I just wonder what implications are there for the owners of land and the potential upstream of the potential catchment management plan.
Well, they need to assume, based on the current land use, what flows would come onto their land from upstream based on the existing land use. Any future development of the land upstream would have the same requirement to ensure that they don't pass a problem downstream. So they would also have to manage their flows to pre-development levels, so they're not exacerbating a problem through this land.
Yeah, okay. I think I've got it there. Thanks. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, stormwater management modelling is pretty sophisticated these days. So I think the mechanics of it aren't the issue so much as we don't have a master plan or anything with respect to how the subdivisions might eventually pan out to know where things might get rooted. I guess you could do a conceptual. I mean, and we'll obviously hear back from the both council later on and Mr. Bonus later on and the applicant also in terms of how they think we might get across this particular issue. So thanks for putting it on the table, and we'll leave it to them to respond in short order. So thank you, Mr. Meadowcroft. I appreciate your statement on that. Now, Mr. Bonus, we've got another 15 minutes. So if you've got a 15-minute package, we can deal with it.
I'll ask Mr. Farquhar if he can be efficient.
Thank you.
Same as with Mr. Meadowcroft. Can you just read quickly through your summary and then respond to any questions that are raised? Thank you.
Yes, good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Farquhar.
Right. So I'll start at paragraph 3 of my summary. I prepared or contributed to the following document. That was a geotechnical peer review, GHD letter to Taupō District Council, 9th of April 2020. In my evidence in chief, I provided comments on sufficiency of investigations undertaken to characterise the geomorphology and geotechnical characteristics of the land, sufficiency of work undertaken to identify and assess geotechnical constraints and the range of natural hazards that may affect the land and constrain residential development. In my evidence, I also provided comment on the submissions of Thomas Hendricks, Turangi Trust, Peter Marshall, Waikato Regional Council, Lakes and Waterways Action Group Trust, Jane Penton. I noted in my evidence that I would undertake a site visit prior to the hearing. I've been unable to do that due to travel restrictions across the Auckland COVID-19 Alert Level 3 boundary. The summary statement is based on the above documents, although it does not replace them, along with consideration of the following. That is the evidence in chief of Ian Keith Hugh Gray for geotechnical matters. I concur with Mr. Gray's conclusions that all sites within the PC 37 area would be generally suitable for residential development from a geotechnical perspective. Observed areas of immediate concern have been highlighted and will need to be addressed during the civil design stage at the time of subdivision. Further unsuitable areas or soils may be encountered during subdivision development, and consideration should be given to this during the civil design stage. Now, I wish to comment further from a natural hazard perspective on stormwater management with respect to the gullies on site. That is, with respect to erosion of pumice soils and the potential for Tomo formation. In commenting, I've referred to stormwater management and gullies where the topic is addressed in the following.
Take that as read, thank you. Yep.
Okay. I note that this is paragraph 11. I note that Waikato Regional Council's opposition to realignment and modification of the natural gully systems, and Waikato Regional Council's strong support for careful management of stormwater. And I've referenced the submissions there. Warren Bird for the applicant supported a gully management plan as a suitable mechanism for establishing which Nukuhau gullies warrant protection, and for those that do, which activities are permissible and which activities are inadvisable. John Palmer for Waikato Regional Council supported the use of the natural gullies for the purposes of stormwater reserve if robust erosion and sediment control practices are used, and Taupō District Council adopts a formalised gully management plan. Mr. Palmer makes recommendations for the actions in a gully management plan. I agree with Mr. Palmer's assessment of the formation of the Nukuhau gullies, the erosion processes that exist, and the risks for erosion and potential for tomo formation once land development occurs and stormwater patterns change. Cheryl Cleary, for the applicant, proposed amendments to address Waikato Regional Council's concerns and to manage the risk of erosion and flooding in the gully system. Ms. Cleary agrees but modifies later amendments proposed by Waikato Regional Council through Ms. Craven. Warren Bird does not refer to the gully management plan in his reply statement of evidence, but addresses the structure plan area rule changes proposed by Waikato Regional Council through Hannah Craven. I support the proposal for a gully management plan. The gully management plan should be could be left to subdivision consent stage or included in the PC 37 provisions. I prefer the latter approach as I consider there to be significant benefit to managing natural hazard risks by having an overall master plan for stormwater management of the gullies. Not having a plan will increase natural hazard risk in the gullies and possibly in adjacent land. A gully management plan would apply before any works are commenced on the land. It would provide an effective and cohesive template for stormwater management where subdivision development of the land occurs in stages. It will allow stormwater management on individual stages to fit into a master plan so that by the time the last portion of land is developed, there are no constraints imposed by practice or development on an earlier stage. Overall stormwater flow patterns relate to what happens both upstream and downstream. When stormwater doesn't work well, the effects are usually exacerbated at the downstream end where flows are at their maximum, as illustrated in John Palmer's evidence. Effects on the adjacent downstream and discharge points need to be managed. The criteria for a gully management plan are outside my area of expertise, and I'm not aware of a similar gully management plan that has been developed elsewhere that could be followed in developing a plan. The form of the plan can be agreed between Waikato Regional Council and the applicant. And then my conclusions are that I consider the geotechnical information provided to support the private plan change satisfactorily demonstrates that the land is suitable for residential and urban development. I consider that sufficient investigations and assessment have been performed to adequately identify the geotechnical hazards and constraints in developing the land. I consider that those constraints can be addressed through further geotechnical investigation and assessment in engineering controls and land engineering works at subdivision stage as per industry practice and as set out in the outline development plan submitted with the plan change. Earthworks anticipated with development are not anticipated to be inappropriate in terms of typical urbanisation of greenfield areas. I support the implementation of a gully management plan and the PC 37 provisions to mitigate the risk of erosion and tomo development and stormwater management in the gullies. The criteria and form of a gully management plan can be agreed between Waikato Regional Council and the applicant. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farquhar. I guess I'm drawn to your comment that you're not familiar with or even aware of any gully management plans. Is that because, well, let me ask you the question, why is that? Is it because they don't exist, or because you haven't been able to research them, or because for some other reason? I mean, we haven't been given, I mean, whilst the idea has been floated with us, as it has with you, obviously, the content of what that might be and how that might be framed up, as you say, whilst that could be agreed with, regional council didn't come forward and help us in that regard at this point in time. So,
I think in this case the gully management plan is quite is site specific in this case, so it's not necessarily a generic plan that you could pull from elsewhere in the country. It's because it does focus on the volcanic soils in the area and the risks associated with stormwater flow in the gullies.
Can you help in terms of what you might think the sort of the 2 or 3 cardinal issues that such a plan would need to address would be?
Well, the main issues are erosion and the potential for Tomo development, and they're probably interlinked. Then you get into the wider stormwater management issues where you across boundaries, changing stormwater flow, and those are covered by others, such as Mr. Meadowcroft was commenting on that. And interrelated into that is obviously the wider catchment management, because it's difficult just to take a small snippet of land, and because it sits within a wider catchment. So stormwater is determined by, or flows across a area of land are determined by the catchment characteristics.
Yeah. So I guess what where I'm trying to get in my head is whether the gully management plan is different from the stormwater management plan, or whether it's simply a reflection or a refraction.
It could be, in this case, maybe it could be it's probably not different. It's probably just, it could be an addition in this case, and maybe that might be a way of doing it, is just extending stormwater management plan to address the particular issues with the and characteristics of the gullies in this area of land.
I mean, we could obviously wrap it up into one plan, which is a stormwater and gully management. I mean, a simple way of doing it. But anyway, we'll hear back from the planners in due course on that one. So, Ms. Farquhar, just check with other questions from Kevin. Did you have any questions, Mr. Farquhar?
No, the only one you've touched on it, David, is just around if there was a gully management plan and a stormwater management plan, would there be a hierarchy in that, or would it be simpler just to roll the two into one for simplicity's sake?
I think for simplicity, it'd be better to roll them together. As soon as you get into a hierarchy, you could, unless you carefully considered what might happen in the future, you might run into problems.
Yeah, thanks for that. Just thinking through naturally the who's that come on? The stormwater management would be wider than just the gullies, but to roll them together would seem to make sense.
Would make sense. Yeah, definitely.
Thanks, Jeff.
Dale?
Nothing from me at this point, Chair.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Farquhar. Appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you.
Right, back to you, Mr. Bonus. I think, unless you've got a 3-minute slot, I think we're going to move to...
Planning evidence it is, sir.
But yes, obviously you've taken a note of the conversation we've just had, so we'll hear back from you a bit later on as to whether you have any solutions for those particular matters.
I think that some of those are already reflected with the discussions that I had last night and what's in the summary statement that's finished. So I guess if I could advise the panel to have a read through my summary, I'll make it very, very brief and be able to respond to some of the questions that may arise.
Right. All right. Well, I mean, we're going to hear from Rangatira Trust now, and then we will be taking the lunch break. There may be an opportunity for you and Ms. Cleary to get together on the phones to see whether you've got common ground on your propositions then.
Yes, sir, I agree. That's a good idea. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bonus. All right, Ms. Seenstra, welcome. Rangatira E-Trust now. And we have just had sent through, but obviously haven't been able to read your legal, so I assume that you are going to take us through your legal submissions. Can you not hear me? You can hear me.
Morena. Morena. Thank you for hearing us across two different rooms. Tēnā katoa ko Setare Steenstra, Taupo-Ingawa, and I appear for Rangatira Trust. And you will see us in two separate rooms, joining you from different locations. John Lenihan and I are in Auckland. He's to my right. And then in the other screen, you will see Alec Wilson Senior, Alex Wilson Junior, and Brett Farquhar, the planning consultant for Rangatira E. Right. So you would have received both the submission, the legal submissions, which I'll take you through, as well as the statement from the joint witness statement from Alec Wilson and Alex Wilson. So they will talk to that. Mr. Lenihan is not giving evidence. He is just here both observing and to sit at the hearing. So without further ado, shall I address you on the submission, sir?
Yeah, please proceed. Yep.
Thank you. As the commissioners know, paragraphs 1 to 3 simply covers off my introductions, and that Rangatira E is a submitter to this proposal. Its submission was dated 5th of March 2021, and then it filed a statement of evidence on the 29th of October. There has been no joint witness conferencing between Mr. Farquhar and any other planner in the course of preparation for this hearing, and the Trust has no experts appointed because of limited resources. It simply wanted to concentrate its attention on raising a number of questions to do with the plan change, and that is the purpose of its submission before you today.
Yeah.
Although Mr. Wilson Senior and Junior will both address you on who Rangatira E Trust is, in summary, I've set out for you at paragraphs 4 through to 8 the establishment of the trust, which was in 1982 under the Māori Affairs Act 1953, and it continues as an Ahu Whenua Trust under the Te Ture Whenua Māori Act 1993. It has previously undertaken development and subdivision of its land, so it is not here in opposition to development. It is here because it has its own interests, which Rangatira E considers will be impacted if this development on the sites identified in the plan proceed as proposed. In total, the trust has 994 hectares on the lake at Acacia Bay, so it really is a significant landholder. As you will see from the plan that you have, there is a sort of an L shape that surrounds the proposed development site, which is the Rangatira E Trust land. And so its use of its land as a farm at present, it has existing use rights, obviously. Water courses have been identified and water will flow downstream towards the lake from the upper reaches of land that it owns. So stormwater management, gully management are all really significant issues for Rangatira E. At paragraph 9, I suggest that Rangatira E's request is that the panel decline the plan change request. These reasons are addressed in the evidence of Mr. Farquhar and Mr. Alex Wilson, Senior and Junior, as well as for reasons that I will address in these legal submissions. It is the Trust's view that the proposed plan change does not take an integrated approach to the rezoning of nearly 80 hectares of land. So far as Rangatira E Trust is concerned, the impact on its use of land, as I said, which sits above and adjacent to the proposed plan site, should be considered through a council-led plan change process, which is comprehensive and integrated. The concerns of the owners of the Rangatira E Trust block, of which there are over 3,000 people, is that the surrounding development will be piecemeal and unsustainable as there is no agreed framework for the development of the required infrastructure. The evidence of the applicant's experts and one of the landowners, Mr. Hickman, is that there are no agreements in place to deliver the necessary infrastructure and that this proposed plan change remains conceptual only. I pause there to note that our team did hear the evidence and the submissions of the applicant yesterday. It has heard everything that has been said for both days so far, and its concerns have not been addressed.
Sure.
Just picking back up at paragraph 12, the traffic and stormwater specialists for the applicant yesterday noted that there may be a block-by-block subdivision, that at each subdivision stage, the requisite effects will be considered and proposals to mitigate or manage effects may be developed depending on the council's requirements in processing any consent application. In the submitter's view, the absence of a clear framework specifying stormwater management, gully management, spiritual and physical cultural management of the land as a whole, it is difficult to see how the sustainable management purpose of the Act can be fulfilled and the plan change approved. I raise a question here as to whether there are in fact development agreements between the applicants and Taupō District Council, as that would be one of the only ways we could ascertain how this thing is actually going to look in 20 years' time and 30 years' time. If there is such an agreement, we certainly have not seen it, and it has not been discussed with anyone else. It is therefore the submitter's view that the council has abandoned its statutory function by allowing growth areas to be identified, but leave out how development occurs. If it does, the council's view is that development is led by private landowners in this district. In our view, that is not a sustainable management approach. Rangatira Trust accept that the land within the plan change has been identified for growth in the TD 2050, and that the council consulted publicly on the strategy, including discussing the strategy with Māori-owned land trusts, including the submitter. However, the council determined that it has become clear that over time, a conventional approach to development has not worked for these multiple owned Māori land block areas. So it is proposed that these growth areas be removed from TD 2050. Further work with these landowners will be needed through the district plan review to establish better mechanisms to develop multiple owned Māori land. And I have your cross-reference there at footnote 1, which is at page 14, section 3.6 of TD 2050. I pause there to note that this is relevant because a number of times during the course of the hearing yesterday, the applicant's experts suggested that A, Rangatira had opted out of the growth strategy, or that it had no interest and that its development rights would not be impacted. And if it wanted to develop its land, it could at some stage in the future. Well, so far as Rangatira is concerned, the council has told it to wait for a holistic review of the district plan in order to determine what's best on its land and how to do it. To date, nothing has been communicated from the council, and as late as May this year, the consultants, including Mr. Lenahan and Mr. Farquhar, met with the council on the aspirations of Rangatira for its land. That takes us through to paragraph 19, where I come to some of the issues of concern for Rangatira in a summary form. Firstly, cultural issues, lack of engagement and consultation with Rangatira Trust as landowner and mana whenua is a failure to satisfy sections 6E, 7 and 8 of the Act. Secondly, narrow consideration has been given to the development rights of Rangatira if this plan change proceeds as proposed. In particular, reverse sensitivity issues and infrastructure issues have not been appropriately considered. Lastly, limited information on the infrastructure issues have been provided. At paragraph 20, I pick up to note that the presentation of Ms. Cleary in her evidence was that the applicants had taken a structure plan process or structure plan approach to this plan change, and that the information provided was sufficient for the conversion of the current rural land in Nukuhau to urban landform. But it is my submission that if the purpose of the proposed plan is to act as a structure plan, significantly more detail is required. The purpose of a structure plan is to establish land use and infrastructure networks and identify the potential effects of urbanisation. A structure plan identifies, investigates and addresses matters which relate to A, the supply of urban land to meet growth project, in this case that which is set out in TD 2050. B, any natural and physical features within the defined area and proposal to manage such features. In this case, that would be the gullies and heritage features, which have not been fully addressed. C, the types of land use and activity, which the proposal does to a limited extent address, but leaves out a number of other matters, including a disagreement on the location of medium density housing and other reverse sensitivity effects. A structure plan in our submission would also address the full layout of transport networks and facilities. The issues in this case result in a non-complying activity recommendation until transport infrastructure and active mode transport is delivered. I'll pause to note there that one of the applicant's experts for traffic suggested that in fact some parts of the development may not be able to proceed until active mode transport, including cycleways, had been completed. Lastly, the location and type of infrastructure that is to be provided is not fully set out in this plan. In our view, this proposed plan lacks any detail to a sufficient extent. Proposed plan change 37 is not a structure plan. Were a structure plan proposed and run by council for this area and incorporated Rangatira land, then there may be a real possibility of truly delivering the vision set out in Taupō District Growth Management Strategy 2050 in an integrated manner that considers the issues raised by the 44 submitters who are opposed to the proposed plan change. I now want to just briefly traverse the response to Rangatira East submission and evidence presented by the applicant. In regard to consultation, although you will hear a little bit more on that from Mr. Alex Wilson Jr., it is the submitter's view that the applicant has taken some liberties in the way it has represented the engagement with the trust. The legal point of contact is the chair and the secretary, and they are publicly listed. Neither the chair nor the secretary have received correspondence from the applicants seeking to engage over the proposed plan change at any time. The applicant's consultant, Mr. Farquhar, in his submission on behalf of the trust lodged in March 2021, noted that as mana whenua, the trust had not been consulted and that no cultural impact assessment was provided by the applicant. As such, he raised the issue as to the lack of consideration to cultural issues in the introduction to the submission. It is noted that the council's request for further information pursuant to clause 23 of Schedule 1 of the Act also did not require additional information on cultural issues arising from engagement from mana whenua. Given the obligations under the Act, if the council is going to recommend approval of the plan and adopt it, then it is expected that some formal engagement is undertaken with mana whenua. Mr. Crawford, in his evidence, has outlined and spoke to the process he had undertaken. In Rangatira E's view, this engagement was and is insufficient. Ms. Cleary for the applicant expressed her oral opinion at the hearing on 8 November that there was no mandatory requirement for applicants to consult mana whenua and that the statutory obligation to consult was with the local authority. Despite this view, she considered engagement by Mr. Crawford was satisfactory. From that, the only inference that can be drawn is that the applicant and the council consider that the statutory requirement under Part 2 of the Act, sections 6E, 7 and 8 have been satisfied. There is nothing to the contrary in the council's section 42A report. Unusually though, the applicant, in response to questions particularly from commissioners, appears to have accepted an oral evidence that a cultural impact assessment ought now be undertaken. Details around how and what the relevant mechanism to do so were unable to be addressed yesterday. Given the wide definition of environment under Section 2 of the Act and the developing case law on this point, it is unusual for a private plan change applicant to fail to provide a cultural impact assessment for the locality where a plan change is proposed. Taupo is a significant historical area. For the applicant's planner to suggest that there's no obligation to consult is somewhat difficult to comprehend for the submitter. Regardless of whether the applicant considered the views of mana whenua, Section 7 of the Act requires that as decision makers, the commissioners have particular regard to cultural matters, and Section 8 requires that the decision makers under the Act take into account the principles of te tiriti o Waitangi. Should the commissioners be of the view that the proposed plan change can be approved, a requirement for a comprehensive development plan, which includes engagement with mana whenua, ought to be required before the plan change can be implemented. I suspect Mr. Maldoni will address you on any legal issues that arise from that suggestion. Nevertheless, I pause to note that it is not uncommon in complex situations like this to have a layer in place to accommodate for cultural engagement, particularly where that cultural engagement and landowner rights overlap. Picking up on paragraph 34, I now turn to address the impact on Rangatira E land and its future development rights. The applicant has provided a limited response to some of the concerns raised by Rangatira E. Whilst presenting its evidence, the applicant maintained a position that the proposed development would not impact on Rangatira E's development rights. It did not address any of the matters raised in the submission or evidence of Mr. Farquhar. The Council's Section 42A report has not addressed the submission of Rangatira E Trust in any detail. The thrust of the applicant and Council reports is that Rangatira E Trust is not part of any future growth, and even if it were, it would not have its development rights affected. This is clearly an erroneous understanding given the wording in TD 2050 already discussed. This is simply a matter of timing. The Council has asked the Trust to wait for the plan review. Whilst the Trust has accepted to do so, the Council has proposed and accepted for processing proposed plan change 37, along with others, to progress the development in Taupo. Rangatira E awaits its turn. Rangatira E is not asking for the applicants to plan the use of the Trust land. However, the applicant must consider how its development might integrate with any development aspirations of any other landowner, in particular with regard to infrastructure and where roads, stormwater management and other gully management issues arise. As addressed in Mr. Farquhar's evidence, given the lack of a buffer between where the proposed plan change proposes to locate housing and the boundary with Rangatira E land, there are likely to be reverse sensitivity effects arising from stormwater runoff whilst Rangatira E's land remains undeveloped. This is exemplifying the type of concern that could be addressed through consultation and an integrated planning framework. Although current stormwater issues in places like Chelsea Rise are alleged to be caused by bad engineering, which was a remark made by one of the applicant's consultants yesterday, no detail is provided by the applicants as to how similar effects will be managed on development within the proposed plan change area. This issue was put to the applicant's expert, Mr. Bird, by both the chair and commissioners. In the absence of a plan change-wide stormwater management plan, lack of landowner agreement on the delivery of infrastructure, and the effects of climate change, the impact of conversion from rural to urban landform will result in potentially significant stormwater management issues and discharges into the lake. A taonga, not just locally, but nationally. Who will manage these effects? The Regional Council now appears to accept that the applicant has addressed all its concerns. However, Rangatira E Trust remains concerned. This proposed plan change presently has no answers to some very significant issues. It is Rangatira E's submission that the plan change should be at least placed on hold, if not declined, whilst a comprehensive development plan is undertaken, setting out the location and linkages and the provision of water, wastewater, transport, stormwater reserves, and how this is to be developed and funded. And a thorough cultural impact assessment is prepared, which identifies all archaeological, heritage, and other cultural issues of significance, and how the proposed development is going to respond to these cultural issues and incorporate these matters into the proposed development. I've already spoken with regard to the limited infrastructure assessment, and the points made in paragraphs 42 through to 44 I've already addressed above. But suffice to say, picking up at paragraph 44, that there are a number of uncertainties which concern Rangatira E, and it is the reason for its inability, its lack of support for this proposed plan change. The most significant point of opposition for Rangatira E Trust is the proposition that the plan should not require specific details as staging of development, and that these staging issues should be resolved through resource consent on a first come, first served basis. The applicant's view is that the proposed plan change does not prevent Rangatira E from undertaking their own development. However, given the infrastructure issues in this locality identified by the applicant and the council's consultant planner in the section 42A report, any future development on the parcel owned by Rangatira E would be significantly compromised. Although there is a first mover advantage in the Act, the reverse of that is certainly also true. There is a last mover disadvantage. The approach of first come, first served basis is not just detrimental to integrated land use, but fails to satisfy the key driver, one of the key drivers of the Act as it stands, the sustainable management and use of limited natural resources, in this case, developable land, as well as the lake as natural receiving environment. It is this submitter's view that there is an uncomfortable coexistence between the ideals of developers who see land as a thing to be used and that of Māori landowners who see land as a long-term asset to be nourished and then to be used to help the community. It is whenua. It is the source that provides sustenance to its people. It is not something to be used and let go of. Turning to part 2 of the Act, I have already covered off some of the issues to do with sections 6, 7 and 8, but one of the matters of key concern is that in regard to kaitiakitanga, it is important to note that it is not just land that is subject to development under the proposed plan change that kaitiakitanga relates to. It is the impact that it has on surrounding land uses. I've addressed that issue more fully in paragraphs 52 and 53 of my submissions. It is Rangatira E's view that the Taupō District Council has accepted to process this plan change without discharging its partnership obligations under Te Tiriti. The principles of Te Tiriti are not confined to consultation, but extend to principles such as partnership and good faith. TDC has failed to consider the principles of Te Tiriti by not acting as a true treaty partner. As commissioners, the submitter asks that this issue be carefully considered in your decision-making process, given that Mr. Bonis has recommended the submissions raised regarding cultural issues be rejected, despite accepting that he cannot decide what the relevant mana whenua views are and how they should be given primacy. Perhaps if TDC had run the plan change process, it might have been able to hear and consider all relevant views. I will pause there because that is my allocated time, and allow you to read the conclusion, which simply reiterates what I have said above. So without further ado, I would like to, unless there are questions you'd like to deal with now.
No, I think we'll hold questions until we've heard from all of your witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now call Mr. Alec Wilson Senior and Alex Wilson to present their evidence. If you'd like to just start from paragraph 1, Alex Senior.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Ka mihi kia koutou e Rangatira e mo nei kei reito te tenei pare. Hei mihi te, hei mihi, He tangi mā tātou, nō reira tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. E ngā take I te rāhane, e tūru te kau mā whitu. O tātou whenua o rangatira I. Kei te hea o te kōreronga I ngā tangata ne. Nō reira tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Alec Olson. I am the chairman of Rangatira E Trust. I have been on the trust since its conception. And we have gone through a lot of trials and tribulations. Up to now, we have made provisions for the council in a number of occasions. They're like the stormwater drain on the southern part of the property. We put that in at our cost. Then they wanted the sewage. We provided them area for the sewage pump, and they said then that we would be able to use that sewage station if we developed. That has not happened. And Chelsea Drive, they developed Chelsea Drive without coming to us. I could have told them that 36 Chelsea Drive was in the middle of a waterway. They failed to do that. So where I'm coming from as chairman of Rangatira E Trust, I was also deputy chairman of Te Arawa Maori Trust Board, and I covered a lot of planning issues in the Arawa district, from Makitu to Tongariro. So I know what is necessary. And here today, what is most necessary is to plan this properly. This is now 2021. We are planning, look at the plan Taupo has got now as it stands. It was planned for horse and dray carts. You've got no parking. You've got big troubles when the schools come out. All the troubles are there. And yet they failed to sit down and plan. I've gone through 3 mayors and I don't know how many councillors in Taupo. And they all sit down and listen and then turn a blind eye to what we are requesting. And we are requesting planning. Let's plan. I have to plan very well because I cannot sell my land. I cannot sell it. So I have to plan so I can get the best use for my people out of it. And I think that unless the council comes together, this will probably be a shambles again, where I'm coming from. So I feel that my people have not been treated well by the Taupo Council. And I feel again that we are significant to the Taupo people, considering that my tupuna gave the land for the township and we now own nothing in it. So I am greatly distressed. I'm also chairman of another block further down the road. They call it Hiahia. And we have our own troubles there, and it's more so exactly the same. What we try to achieve is not listened to. So the commission, my cousin Andrew says was before you earlier. He gave you our history. I'm also on an 8A17 and 8A16. So we go right across a lot of the blocks in Taupo. And unless we plan well, my people will continue to suffer and lose their land. So we have to plan. And plan well. I look back to what I was taught by my tupunas. They called it the treaty. The treaty was supposed to treat us equal. That is not so. I can point out numerous occasions where we've been totally ignored. To me, the treaty was a 50-50 partnership, and it was under the way it was organized. My people refused to sign the treaty up in Waitangi because they felt that their mana was being walked on. They come back home and the representatives of the Crown had to come here and meet with them personally. And that's how we end up signing the treaty. So where I'm coming from, we need better planning. And this is not better planning. This is planning for profit. And once you do that, you get what they got now across the river from us, a shamozzle. So I will now ask the secretary to read my report because I had a laser treatment on my eyes on last Friday, and I can't see that well. So I'll ask the secretary to read mine.
Kia whai. Tēnā tātou katoa, e mihi atu kia koutou I tēnei rā. I'll just read from our submission that Satare has sent through recently, and covering off the areas also within where Uncle Alec was going to speak to as well. So just in regards to my uncle, we've given a little bit of whakapapa there and his affiliations to not only here in Rotorua, but also down in Taupō, and some of his professional backgrounds in terms of the boards that he sits on and the chairs that he's run. We've also noted there that Gloria McLaughlin is also a trustee on the Rangatira E, and she is very well versed in the Taupō community, very well connected and talking with a lot of people there. However, those discussions are merely discussions, and Gloria sort of just getting insights while she's in the community. I'll just speak a little bit on the background around the Rangatira E trustees, noting that the beneficiaries come from Ngāti Ruangārangi, Ngāti Rauhoto, and Ngāti Turunga. It's been mentioned that the land comprises of 994 hectares and located at Acacia Bay on the western shores of Lake Taupō. There are 3,461 owners in the trust, and the trustees and the chairman represent their views, and the trust makes decisions on behalf of these owners. The parcel of land owned by Rangatira is not culturally significant in any way other than that it is required to be used in a manner that delivers for the benefits of its owners. And considering how the land is developed, we need to provide for the future of our people. That is why we have wanted to develop our land, but been told by council to wait while we watch others, like the applicants, develop their land. Despite the statements made by Mr. Hickman and Mr. Crawford for the applicants, the trust has not met with the applicants, nor has the trust received communications to discuss any of the concerns. The applicants have never written to the trust to consult with the trust, and we did not pull out of the growth plan proposals in 2018. We've been excluded on the basis that the land and the ownership of multiple owners is difficult to develop. That is a matter for the trust to deal with, not a matter that results in us being excluded. As late as May this year, we had a meeting with council to discuss the development aspirations of Rangatira E. At this meeting, the consultation was real and meaningful, but that has only happened there. I'll then sort of read from a statement made by myself. I've given a bit of background to my whakapapa and my affiliations also. as well as giving some of my professional credentials and noting my place of employment and role within the firm. The trust land is vested in 4 trustees who have been elected by the owners and appointed by the Māori Land Court. They remain trustees until they die, resign, or are removed. It is their responsibility to manage the trust land and any other assets in accordance with the trust order. I've been the Secretary and Treasurer for the Trust since 2018-2019, taking over from my previous colleague, Peter Faulkner. I feel privileged to work alongside my uncle as Chairman of the Trust and other trustees to help safeguard the whenua for future generations, ensuring the economic operations of the Trust are ongoing, and also to look to maximise the development opportunities for the Trust. And this will ultimately benefit the 3,461 owners, including myself as a future shareholder, my children, their children, and the future generations. I'll also add too that as time goes on, that list of owners does increase, and that's only going to become greater over a period of time. During my short period of time as Secretary for the Trust, I have witnessed a lack of engagement from the Taupō District Council on what I consider important matters for the Trust. Yet, there's full engagement from the Council on matters that they think are important, and they need to come to the Trust to either get consent or to ask for a favour on. My uncle's actually mentioned some of these, but examples of this, and most recently, is that the Trust has been working closely with the Council, installing the freshwater pipelines along Acacia Bay Road, as well as the footpaths along Acacia Bay Road. Rangatira E has also been really accommodating in respect of this and allowing the contractors to operate on the farm, in a certain area of the farm, to store their machinery, their materials, and construct the infrastructure on their farm. This has all been done free of charge. So Rangatira E does work with Council where we can help the community at large here. There's other examples, and these are prior to my time, which Michael's mentioned. This is the wastewater pump facilities, where a promise was made by the Council to allow some of that capacity in the system to be used for future development in Rangatira E, and also setting aside overland pathways for stormwater runoff in a major rainfall event. It seems to me that Rangatira E has and is consistently assisting the Taupō District Council on many matters which ultimately benefits the Taupō community, yet the favour is never returned back to Rangatira E and its owners. In response to the issues with the proposed plan change 37, the Trust is not opposed to the development of the applicant's land. That is why the Trust submission was specific to development issues raised by the proposed plan change. We've commissioned and worked with Mr. Brett Farquhar from Stratum Consultants and Mr. John Lenihan from RCG. The aspirations of the Trust have already been expressed to some extent through the resource consent issued in 2007 to develop some of the Trust land. This was appealed in the Environment Court, but was settled. However, the resource consent was not implemented. The inability to implement that consent does not mean that Rangatira E wishes to stand by and see its land in Acacia Bay used to mitigate the effects of surrounding development. The key is that that is the key concern here. We note that during the hearing yesterday, some of the concerns were raised and reflected in the questions from the commissioners to the applicant's experts. This is all because there is an uncomfortable coexistence between the ideals of the developers who see the land as a thing to be used and that of Māori landowners who see the land as a long-term asset, or see it as a long-term asset to be nourished and then to be used to help the community. It is our whenua. It is the source that provides our people sustenance. The applicant, Mr. Cleary, suggesting that no cultural impact assessment is necessary is really unacceptable. An assessment to show the impact of the development on nearby multiple owned Māori land, like that of Rangatira E, would allow effects of the development to be comprehensively assessed. Use of the land is a partnership. It is unacceptable that the applicants have chosen to talk to some people and rely on the views that suit their development interests. The requirements that Rangatira E be involved arise not just from the RMA, but because Rangatira E is a recognised Māori landowner in Taupō, and specifically noted in the Taupō 2050 growth strategy, it has mana, not just as a landowner, but as mana whenua, which has been completely ignored yet again by the council. In administering the plan change and the current process with the applicant. I'll reiterate this, Rangatira E is not opposed to development, as acknowledged by the chair, Mr. Hill. Rangatira E had a resource consent to undertake its own development. Neither is Rangatira E opposed to the implementation of the structure plan set out in the Taupō Growth Management Strategy. That strategy notes that Rangatira E is a significant landowner and part of the growth management solution. In other words, the council recognises that Rangatira E is a partner in its decision making. However, the council is not in any way sought to be inclusive in requiring consultation with Rangatira E in the plan change process as an adjacent landowner. Given that no cultural impact assessment has been provided, and we raise the issue in our submissions, we are concerned that the applicants have no interest in engaging with us. Not once has there been a formal request from the applicant to the chair of Rangatira E to consult on the plan change. Mr. Crawford states in his evidence that he wrote to us to meet with us. That is incorrect. We were not contacted in planning stages of the plan change. We did not provide any letters of support. Mr. Crawford wrote to Mr. Lenehan on a consultant we are working with, as Mr. Lenehan was attending a meeting with us in May 2021. On that same date, we agreed that Mr. Lenehan could meet with Mr. Crawford. That was on the 14th of May 2021. We didn't hear from Mr. Crawford after that date. It would be normal practice that the applicant would write to the chair of Rangatira E Trust through Deloitte and myself as secretary for the trust, and we have a formal engagement process. For applicants to say that they spoke to the trustee about Rangatira E's land is simply not in our view good practice to satisfy the requirement to consult. Even after our evidence was submitted on the 29th of October, we still did not hear from the applicants. Recently, attempts have been made to engage in unusual ways by the applicant through text messages and emails suggesting that we are opposed to development. We simply want to work together. The applicant's planner said in her evidence that she does not consider that consultation is required under the RMA. In light of the necessity for a holistic approach to planning, one that requires the interest of the parties, including Rangatira E, it is the council's role under the RMA to lead a plan review. The council has said on numerous occasions it is not going to do that. However, it has not, was going to do that, but has not. We are left with a piecemeal approach to development, such as this one, and one where Rangatira E is locked out of the conversion, conversation and planning. The 2018 Taupō District Council 2050 growth plan. The applicant has said a number of times that Rangatira E chose not to be part of the growth plan and that is not therefore affected by urbanisation of nearby land. This is simply incorrect. We have removed, due to difficulties, council suggestion arose from land held in our trust structure. The 2050 development plan specifically states this on page 14. It also states that the council-led plan change is the answer. We are still awaiting for that plan change. As already noted, Rangatira E has had and continues to have development aspirations which allow its 3,461 owners to benefit from the freehold ownership of this land. We say that we should be part of the conversation in the development of Taupō. If this was a council-led plan change, we would have to be. In response to the applicant's evidence on the 8th of November, stormwater, gully management and transport issues must be considered on a wider basis, not parcel by parcel as done in this instance. That is why this should be a council-led plan change. The interest of private and Māori freehold land to deliver on Taupō's strategic vision in developing this part of Taupō. We have not used our limited resources to appoint specialist technical experts to point this out to the applicant and what and how this development is problematic. We note that on the transport, the council's consultant planner had pointed out the lack of road linkages. No similar technical expert has looked at the stormwater issues from an integrated point of view. The concerns raised in the hearing is a lack of stormwater management plan for the whole area, along with the gully management plan, give us great concerns given that our rural land impacts on the flows through what will be urban land. Before this plan change goes any further, we would like to see a cultural impact assessment carried out. We do not think that a piecemeal approach to this is possible. In this case, we're told by the applicant that a subdivision stage, that at subdivision stage, a number of technical issues will be remedied. In our view, that is not good enough. At this stage, where the expectations of the community are being set, there needs to be details of technical issues. Otherwise, the community and Rangatira have to be involved yet again with the planning process, only to be told, you're too late. The plan change allows the development in the form proposed. We want to work with council and other landowners in Acacia Bay to implement the growth management strategy, which in itself is now outdated. Nevertheless, there is development pressure in this area, and we want to be part of the solution. In New Zealand, Māori voices have been absent from local government decision-making for a long time. We will no longer sit by and watch as our whenua is used by others without input from us. In conclusion, there is a Māori proverb which goes, ko te toto te kai o te tinana, blood is the food of the body. Ko te whenua o te oranga o te iwi, it is the land that sustains the people. Without both, our people will not survive. Our people have been here for over 1,000 years. Whether the owners and the beneficiaries of Rangatira East suffer or prosper will depend on the decision reached on this application. It may appear extreme, but in the manner in which Māori treat land, this is a real issue. We can't simply develop and sell like some of the other landowners in this region. We have to ensure the use of the land is capable of sustaining our people for another 1,000 years. That is why the issue of integrated land development is of particular concern. This plan change should not be accepted. An integrated planning process led by the council with parties providing input and which looks at the effects of the development on all available and developable land in the Acacia Bay area should be considered. Ora tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Steenstra, were you anticipating that Mr. Whakaaro would address us as well or not?
Yes, sir, he will briefly address you on his planning evidence. Mr. Whakaaro, if I ask you to address your evidence in summary, please.
Certainly. Kia ora katoa. Brett Whakaaro. I'm a planner and director of Stratum Consultants Limited. Under your direction, I will just sort of touch on the high points of my evidence. Obviously, legal counsel and Alec and Alex Wilson have addressed many of the concerns in my evidence. So I will just see if I can just, like I said before, just hit the high points. I just wanted to say, just quickly, I did prepare the submission for Rangatira. I did prepare the statement of evidence, which was lodged on the 29th of October. And I have heard the applicant's evidence yesterday and reviewed the reply of evidence of the applicant. I've also heard the statement of evidence from Mr. Andrew Q-Subs this morning from 8A17. I wish to also add that I did not raise the issue of cultural impacts on the Rangatira Trust. Contained in the submissions is a point in the background section of our submission addressing the lack of consultation with Rangatira, and that's been well versed so far this morning. I just want to also make the point, there is actually no record of any emails or correspondence from Mr. Crawford in my system. I have not been asked to meet with him on the submission I lodged on behalf of Rangatira. Just working through my evidence, obviously it's been well said, but obviously Rangatira are a significant landowner in the wider Acacia Bay area with land holdings of in excess of 994 hectares. They have their land is directly adjacent to the west and north of the land within PP 37. In the back of my evidence in attachment 1, I have included a location plan for a little bit of clarity around that. Just moving to 2.1 of my evidence.
I think you should move a little bit faster than that.
Point taken.
I mean, let me be frank. We have heard both through legal subs and now through the representations made by Messrs. Alec Wilson, Senior and Junior, a lot of this material. So from a planning point of view, maybe just hit the planning issues that we need to think about, if you would.
Yes. Okay. Well, maybe we'll work through to within section 3 of my evidence, and it's been reinforced over and over again about the lack of a overall structure plan for the wider Acacia Bay area. That the Plan Change 37 has very much been an insular plan change looking at their own land holdings, noting that there is also ad hoc developments happening either side of Rangatira's land. And in 3.5 of my evidence, I just sort of outline the Watani Lane Road subdivision, 100 Lock Views to the south, and obviously Plan Change 37. And again, in attachment 2, I've shown a plan of where those are located in relation to Rangatira's land. But I guess the main thrust of what we're saying is this inclusive wider plan change should be incorporated. And I do outline a number of objectives and policies through the National Policy Statement of Urban Development, also the Waikato Regional Statement, and also the Taupō District Plan. And they used a lot of policy language in terms about integrated infrastructure, integrated planning, integrated funding, the efficient and effective way of providing higher order statutory framework. Again, integrated, sustainable and planned and coordinated manner. So the language is talking about a wider coordinated approach. And obviously, in our opinion, in my view, that's certainly not the case in this point here. So if I just sort of talk quickly to the planner's report, section 42A report, in many ways, Rangatira is disappointed in the language that was used, or maybe the lack of language within the section 42A report. Many of the points raised in the Rangatira submission were given very little consideration. In fact, it's almost silent on Rangatira apart from a few rejections at the back table of the section 42A report. However, in saying that though, Mr. Bonus in his section 42A report has sort of touched on quite a relevant matter in terms of the lack of infrastructure, and the section 42A report does talk about or setting up a policy and rule framework about making, due to these development constraints, making this plan change a non-complying activity. In my opinion, allowing the rezoning of the land through a private plan change on one hand, yet imposing a non-complying rule on the other hand, does not make a lot of sense. You know, why have a plan change to keep the status quo? So the better outcome, in our opinion, in my opinion, is to resolve all these matters up front, and that's through a wider structured planning process. And then obviously what would follow that is an easier planning process from that, whether it be a controlled or restricted discretionary subdivision applications thereafter. I guess that pretty much summarises the bulk of my evidence. Obviously, reiterating that the trust point of view is obviously to defer this plan change or decline it in its entirety until a wider structure planning process has been undertaken.
Yeah, I mean, from a professional planner's point of view, what's your conclusion on that rather than what the trust's wishes are?
Look, we're not saying that you cannot apply for a private plan change. Obviously, the RMA Schedule 1 does allow for that. But in my opinion, given the land holdings, and even the Taupō District Council have outlined where Rangatira East sit on that western Taupō side of things, that a collective wider structure plan or even a growth plan incorporating the existing Acacia Bay Village, Nukuhau, and actually plan this properly from a wider perspective is better than the piecemeal approach that's been taken at this point in time.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Farquhar. We just, Ms. Steenstra, did you have anything else before we turn to questions?
No, sir, we are in your hands, and I apologise for seeking your indulgence for slightly longer time than allocated.
I'd always anticipated that. I won't say that's a good idea, but certainly expected. Right, questions. Dale, would you like to pursue anything in particular?
Thank you for that. Thank you for your evidence this morning. I guess I'm interested to hear a little bit more around the aspirations you have for Rangatira E. In particular, I'd like to hear a little bit more about, in your opinion, why you think this plan change restricts your aspirations. Yeah, I'll start there.
Can I defer the question to Mr. Wilson?
Well, in my opinion, it's all piecemeal. When you plan something, we were looking at just recently looking at a retired village type of thing for the elders. And when you get this piecemeal going on around you, it's not good planning, in my opinion. And being that we cannot sell our land, we have to plan twice as good as anyone that just wants to do a development and sell it. Our planning has to go on for years and years and years. His planning is tomorrow when he gets the money in the bank. So we have to look at it from a different direction. And my direction is to treat the land and the land being used in perpetuity, so that the development will be there for 100 years. That's what we look for. Otherwise, my people are going to be out in the cold.
And forgive me, because I'm not, I don't whakapapa to this area, but there is, in addition to, I mean, we've heard a lot from the Rangatira blocks in the southern area, but we also have this 9 hectares through this Ahu Whenua Trust, this Māori land included in the plan change. Obviously they'll face some of those constraints that you've talked about in terms of not being able to sell.
Yeah, but some of them can sell, but we can't.
Yeah, yeah.
Some of them are under their court orders can sell as long as they use the money to do something else with it than buy other property. We can't.
Yeah. So I go back to I'm just trying to understand from your perspective, without making my own assumptions about why this plan change stops you from doing what you want to do. I hear the concerns around relationship with council and others, but the resource consents that you talk about, is that limited specifically to that shopping centre, or was there another type consent around residential development? I think it was 2007.
No, the shopping centre was a different issue. We could see at that time that the shopping centre that we had planned was already out of date. So what we did was we withdrew and looked at the wider plan.
Okay, so that's different again to the other shopping centre that we heard about from Mr. Q-Sebs. Okay, I've got the wrong one.
Yes.
Okay, so this is more around your Acacia Bay Road area, is it?
That's correct. The 8A17 shopping centre is only a small neighbourhood shopping centre. So I don't see that affecting a lot of people that's already there. But if we're going to plan and do areas like the big areas like we're talking about, we've got to plan well so that everyone can make use of it. If you go to the shop in Taupo as it is now, you'll be lucky to get a parking area. And that's bad planning. And at 3 o'clock, you can't even get into town because the schools come out and the roads are just blocked off. So I don't want that planning for my people. I want my people and the land we've got to be used perfectly. And I've been in planning. I've done it. I've already done it in Rotorua. So I know what I'm talking about.
So I guess then I'm sort of going back to the same question about trying to understand why this restricts what you want to do.
Well,
maybe you could speak to the fact that you've raised some reverse sensitivity issues in your submission and what those look like, whether those views have changed at all and the information that we've heard over the past couple of days.
Well, if you were listening, I'm not against them doing their planning. What we have to do is to see what's going to happen to the whole area. You're talking about a little parcel of land that's going to affect a big parcel of land when you come to planning. And what is actually happening is that ad hoc stuff is not good.
Maybe if I can just come in there, Mr. Wilson. I think what the Commissioner is trying to understand, and it would be helpful for me to understand as well, is not what you see to be the deficiencies of the plan change that's currently before us, because we've heard that.
Yeah.
But it's really how, the question is, how does it affect your aspirations? I mean, we understand the issues that you've raised with respect to your consultation disappointments with respect to council. We're not sitting here as council, we're sitting here as independent commissioners, so that's not an issue that we can take any further. But we need to understand why it is that you think that this subdivision application moving forward, or not application, but the plan change moving forward, inhibits your ability to do what it is that you want with the wider land. So it'd be really helpful if we could understand what the implications of it actually are for you.
Yeah. Oh, Brett.
I can sort of partially answer that, David. I think what we're asking for here is, look, the plan change is a plan change. There hasn't been enough reports or work done for things like stormwater, the infrastructure.
I understand that, and I mean we're you know, those are on our table, so there's no issue with respect to them being issues that we're unaware of. We're aware of that, and Mr. Farquhar's heard us questioning that over the last 18 hours or 24 or however many hours it happens to have been. But it's this other issue of I mean, let's cut to the chase on some of these matters. You would have been aware, I'm assuming, that this plan change was being developed and moving through, even if the consultation wasn't directly with the chair and yourself as secretary. So I guess the question that I have in my mind is, what steps did you take to actually involve yourself in the process?
We got wind of the plan change, or sort of coming about, probably might have been 3 or 4 weeks before it actually was notified, was made public. At that point in time, and we'd already been engaging with John Lenihan and Brett from Stratum as well on other sort of development aspirations. When we heard about this, we tried to find out more information and engaged the special advice of Brett and John at that time. But at no point had we had early consultation or early insights into what was happening.
No, we certainly heard you on that score, and that's something we obviously need to take into account. But this is all part and parcel of the process. So whilst I accept, at least on the face of it, that the consultation has not been particularly robust with yourselves, we're now in that process of I guess moving forward. Question is for me, and the other commissioners will have different ideas on that, but how can we move forward and be constructive in moving forward? I mean, the option that we have on the table at the moment seems to be quite a limited one from the point of view of Rangatira E Trust anyway, because I don't see a credible way forward other than the recommendation to reject the plan change.
If I may, yes, that is the preference for Rangatira E, but there is a middle ground in terms of a holding pattern here. You would have well heard over the last couple of days about almost a lack of detailed information provided, whether it be transport from a Rangatira E perspective. It's the stormwater, and highlighted in my evidence was the Chelsea Rise situation. So cultural impact assessments has been brought up as well. So there are a number of things. Archaeology has been brought up. So there are a number of things that parking this process and getting the full picture and having a full understanding of the wider Acacia Bay area may be the direction the commissioners might want to have a think about.
And you think that's open to us? I mean, that's almost tantamount to making a decision that they should not progress, isn't it?
Well, that's kind of almost where the Section 42A report is sort of recommended in terms of approving the plan change, however, making everything non-complying, which I don't think is great planning myself. You either accept the plan change or you don't, but there is a middle ground available.
Yeah, and I accept that we could resolve those issues with respect to stormwater and whether we can resolve the cultural impact one, I'm not sure, but technically we could resolve those issues. But would that satisfy Rangatira E's other concern, which Mr. Wilson Senior has been putting before us, for a much wider integrated planning process?
Yeah, if I may again, I guess that is underpinning the feelings of Rangatira E is they've been left out of the process. There's a real opportunity to make Acacia Bay almost look after itself, given the control gates constraints, second bridge constraints, and just being part of that process, planning it all together was an opportunity missed, I guess, is probably one to make.
Yeah, fair comment.
Can I just
sorry, back to you, Dale. Sorry, Ms. Steenstra.
Just adding to that point and leaving Acacia Bay to fend for itself, I think potentially an opportunity here was for some of the experts for the applicant to caucus with Rangatira E to, for instance, show where road linkages, stormwater, gully management, how some of those things could occur. So it's possible, given the length of time required to potentially write this decision, that a set of provisions and plans could be developed between Rangatira E and the applicants to identify where, because you can't have cul-de-sacs ending at the end of where the applicant's sites meets Rangatira E site. Those roads have got to go somewhere. Those stormwater pipes potentially have to go somewhere. Reserves have to be located. So this is an opportunity potentially to use some out-of-the-box thinking and actually put some provisions to you for reconsideration as part of the applicant's reply, which has buy-in from Rangatira E. So we are in uncharted waters, I'm sorry to say.
Well, not really uncharted. It's a fairly common practice these days, I would suggest. And of course, quite a few of the questions are not really for my benefit. They're for Mr. Muldowney's benefit in due course, as he will be well aware.
I meant uncharted in that at such a late stage involving one of the adjacent landowners. That's the only.
Well, yeah. And I mean, if we if we were to determine that those issues were of such significance, that is then when a decline obviously comes into our minds. But yeah, let's not turn our minds there for the moment. Dale, sorry, I interrupted your question, so my apologies for that. Would you like to carry on?
No, I'm happy to give Commissioner Taylor a turn. Chair.
Right, Kevin.
Thanks, David. Look, maybe if I could just pick up Mr. Whakaaro on comments you've just made and pick up, if I've interpreted, David, your response, that if the issues that have been presented to us across a wide range of disciplines, wastewater, stormwater, transportation, cultural impact assessment, archaeology, and so forth. I just want to make sure I'm clear. So if perchance those issues were adequately resolved, where does Rangatira E sit then?
Sorry, we just lost our engineer for a little bit. So was that correct question directed at myself? Is that right?
If you're happy to take it, absolutely, yes.
Well, maybe I could start, but I guess from a purely professional planning point of view, yes, it would, because those are key things in terms of how they directly affect Rangatira E. I guess just underpinning that is the thought and the Rangatira E position that this really should have been looked at in a wider sense rather than just a sort of a narrow scope of just the land holding in question. I'm not sure if that answers your question, sorry.
Yeah, partially. You would have heard my question earlier on regarding stormwater with the global view, and I asked the question around upstream effects, so which clearly falls into your land, or Rangatira E land. But I guess my question is, you've raised significant opposition to this, that around consultation and around cultural impact assessment and a number of other things. But if the issues that you've raised pertinent to this plan change request were addressed and were satisfied, where would Rangatira E sit then in terms of your position on this? Because you've talked about, a whole review of planning across a wider area. I mean, is that still your position, or are we talking about the issues raised? If they're resolved, where do you sit, really?
Yeah, look, again, it's difficult to answer.
Yeah, look, sorry, I can see that's a loaded question. So.
Yeah, I don't know whether our legal counsel got any comment on that. Satari?
Sadly, I think that is a question specifically for the chair secretary, but that it can only be answered, Commissioner Taylor, once these provisions spoken of are developed so that Rangatira E is aware of what parcels it has left over to do what it wants with, and that there is engagement on the council's part to assist it to do so. So if it's going to allow for gullies to be identified, reserves to be identified, roadways and such things, then once that occurs, then we could have certainty about what parcels it has left over to do what it wants with. So really it's apart from being a loaded question, it's a catch-22 as it were, because until we know what is planned, we can't make any assertions either way.
Thank you.
All right, Dale, any last questions? I shouldn't say last questions, any questions, I should say. Right. Well, Mr. Danger, thank you very much. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add as a sort of a closing statement.
No, apart from the offer we made to work with the applicant.
Yes, and that's noted, and we'll hear later on whether, or well, not here later on, if that's something which the applicant wishes to pick up. Obviously, there's an opportunity as we head to lunch to have a conversation about that. But In the meantime, thank you, Rangatira for your submission, and I think we'll head off to lunch now. We'll resume at 1 o'clock with council and continue with council's responses. So thank you very much, and enjoy your lunch.
Well, thank you.